Your anger has cost you more than all your failures combined. More than the businesses that didn't work out. More than the jobs you lost. More than the wrong decisions you made with a cool head that still went badly anyway. Think about this for a moment. Not about what made you explode last time. That doesn't matter now. What matters is what happened after. The silence from your partner for days on end. The fear in your children's eyes when you raised your voice. The email you sent in the heat of the moment that you can't take back. The meeting where you said something you shouldn't have, and everyone remembered it far longer than you'd like. The friendship that was never the same after that conversation. Do you have it? Good. That's what your anger has cost you, and that's only what you can remember. Because there are losses that have no name. Opportunities that never came because someone saw you explode once and quietly decided you weren't the person they could trust. Doors that closed without a slam, without warning, without anyone explaining why. Relationships that slowly cooled, without a definitive fight, without a clear moment of rupture, just the accumulated wear of living close to someone who doesn't know when they're going to blow. That was your anger too. You paid for that too. Welcome to episode 3 of Master Your Mind. This is Stoicism for Winners. In the first episode of this series, we confronted you with a truth you didn't want to see, that you've been living as a slave to your emotions, reacting, exploding, regretting, and going back to repeat the same cycle because nobody taught you another way to do it. Nobody sat you in front of a mirror and said, "This thing you call character, this thing you defend as part of who you are, has a price you've been paying for years without realizing it." In the second episode, we gave you the first real tool, the space, that invisible instant between what happens to you and how you respond. That second where all your freedom lives and where most people never enter because nobody told them it existed. You learned that between stimulus and response there's a distance, small, almost imperceptible, but real, and that in that distance it's decided who you truly are. Not in the big moments, in the small ones, the ones nobody sees but that you feel for days. Today we've arrived at the third episode, and it's no coincidence that this is the third. The first woke you up, the second gave you the instrument, and this episode is going to show you exactly what that instrument is for when the most costly emotion that exists comes looking for you. Because anger doesn't warn you, it doesn't knock on the door, it doesn't give you time to prepare. It arrives and takes you, and if you haven't built anything inside before it arrives, you won't be able to do anything when it's there. Anger. There is no emotion that has destroyed more lives. No emotion that has ruined more families, more careers, more relationships, more people. And the cruelest thing, the most ironic thing about all of this, is that most of those who've suffered its consequences keep defending it, keep protecting it, keep calling it character, or passion, or proof that something matters to them, as if exploding were a sign of strength, as if losing control were a virtue, as if anger were power. Today we're going to dismantle that lie, completely, without mercy. Because as long as you keep believing your anger is strength, you'll keep paying the highest price there is, the price of destroying with your own hands what you built with your own hands. There are 3 men who lived nearly 2,000 years ago and who thought about anger with a depth that few human beings have reached before or since. 3 men who arrived at the same conclusion from completely different places, from exile, from the throne, from slavery. And that conclusion, that truth they reached by different paths, is the backbone of everything you're going to hear today. The first is Lucius Annaeus Seneca. Picture this scene. You're in Rome. It's the year 41 AD. You're one of the most brilliant men of your generation. Writer, philosopher, orator. You've spent decades building a reputation very few managed to build in an entire lifetime. You have access to the empire's highest circles of power. You have influence. You have respect. You have everything a person of your era could desire. And one day, without warning, Emperor Claudius signs an order. Exile. Not for a real crime. For palace intrigues. For the envy of those who have the power to destroy you with a single signature. They ship you to Corsica, a small, arid island, far from everything you know and everyone you love, from your family, from your friends, from your entire world. And there, in that exile that would last 8 years, Seneca did something nobody would expect from someone in that situation. He didn't consume himself with anger. He wrote about anger with the precision of a surgeon opening something to understand exactly how it works, with the detachment of someone who'd observed that emotion from the inside and the outside for years. And his conclusion, after having suffered firsthand the injustice that most easily ignites anger in any human being, was this: anger is a brief madness. He didn't say it as a poetic metaphor, he said it as a clinical diagnosis. Because Seneca understood something most men take a lifetime to grasp, if they ever grasp it at all. That when anger takes you, you literally lose your reason. Not figuratively, actually. Someone who explodes with anger isn't thinking. They're reacting from a place where reason has no access. And someone who reacts without thinking is, in that exact moment, as dangerous to themselves as to anyone nearby. The second is Marcus Aurelius. Picture another moment. You're on the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. It's approximately 170 AD. You've been on military campaign for years in conditions that exhaust even the most tempered man. The cold of Danube nights cuts to the bone. The news arriving from Rome is bad. Your co-emperor has died. A plague is devastating entire cities. There are betrayals at court. There are generals you trusted who've made decisions that cost lives and that you now have to correct without being able to show the anger any human being would feel in your place. You hold in your hands the most absolute power that exists in the known world. You could destroy anyone who crossed your path, with one order, with one word, without consequences for you, without anyone being able to do anything about it. What do? Marcus Aurelius opens his journal and writes, "Not to publish, not for anyone to read, to remind himself each day who he wants to be, to stay anchored to his principles at the exact moment everything conspires to knock him off center." And in those pages he writes something about anger that has been true for 20 centuries. To be angry with the world is to be angry with nature. It's to be angry with fire for burning, with water for being wet, with winter for bringing cold. The world isn't going to change because you rage at it. People aren't going to behave the way you want because you lose control. Injustice isn't corrected by your emotional explosion. Only you pay the price. The third is Epictetus. His story is radically different from the other two. Epictetus was born a slave. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. He was literally the property of another man. He couldn't decide where to live, what to do, where to go, who to talk to. His entire life was in another's hands, and his master, a man named Epictetus, in an act of cruelty documented by those who wrote about his life, began deliberately twisting his leg. Epictetus, as the story goes, looked at him calmly and said, "You're going to break it." Epictetus continued. He broke it, and Epictetus, with a broken leg, simply said, "I told you so," without screaming, without exploding, without anger. Think about that for a moment. A person who has nothing, who can't decide anything, who just suffered a deliberate, unnecessary act of physical cruelty, and who responds with the absolute serenity of someone who has understood something most free men, with all their possibilities and all their options, never manage to understand. That nobody can take from you what you decide to be on the inside. Nobody. Not pain, not injustice, not cruelty, not loss. Epictetus taught that if someone makes you angry, it's not their words or their actions that produce your anger. It's your own judgment about those words and actions. And that judgment, unlike what others do or say, is completely under your control. Always. Even when it hurts. Even when you're right to feel wounded. Even when the injustice is real and verifiable, and nobody in their right mind would fault you for being angry. The judgment is still yours, and therefore the response is too. These three men, Seneca from exile, Marcus Aurelius from the most powerful throne in the known world, Epictetus from the most absolute slavery, arrived at the same truth by completely different paths. Anger is not your ally. It's your most costly enemy. Today we're going to walk through 10 Stoic lessons about this emotion. 10 truths built on centuries of observation, of real suffering, of deliberate practice. Not so you suppress anger, not so you pretend you don't feel it, but so you stop being its victim and start being its master. The phrase that accompanies you today, the one I want you to carry with you from this moment, is this: anger impoverishes you. Every time you feel it growing, every time something lights that fuse inside, every time you're 1 second from exploding, remember this: anger impoverishes you. Not just in money, in respect, in relationships, in opportunities, in inner peace, in everything that truly matters when the day ends and you're left alone with who you are. Let's begin. First Stoic lesson. Anger disguises itself as strength but is the emotion of the weak, because the truly strong man doesn't need to explode to earn respect. There's a lie that has circulated among men for centuries. A lie so old and so repeated that nobody questions it anymore, that nobody stops to examine. That gets passed from generation to generation, as if it were a truth so obvious that questioning it were a sign of naivety or weakness. The lie goes like this: a man with character is a man who doesn't let himself get walked on, who explodes when provoked, who raises his voice when someone crosses the line, who demonstrates with his anger that he's no coward, that he has blood in his veins, that he's not someone who stays quiet when something's wrong. That lie has destroyed more men than any external enemy, because it confuses two things that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. It confuses character with loss of control. It confuses strength with explosion. It confuses respect with fear. And they're three completely different confusions that produce exactly the same result. Someone who believes they're demonstrating power, when in reality they're demonstrating that something external has the power to knock them off center, that something outside of them can decide how they behave, that it's not them choosing their responses but the circumstances, the people, the events they can't control. That's not strength. That's exactly the opposite. Think about the people you respect most in your life. Not the ones who generate fear, not the ones who make you walk on eggshells to avoid provoking them. The ones you genuinely respect, the ones you'd take as a reference if you had to make a difficult decision. The ones you admire not for what they have, but for who they are. Is any of them known for exploding, for raising their voice when something goes wrong, for losing control in high-pressure situations? Probably not. The people you respect most are probably exactly the opposite. They're the ones who remain serene when everything falls apart, who speak with a calm that cuts deeper than any shout, who make clear, firm decisions when the atmosphere is charged with emotion and everyone around them is reacting from panic or anger. That's not weakness disguised as serenity. That's the highest form of strength there is. Seneca wrote it with a precision that hasn't aged a single day in 2,000 years. Whoever cannot contain himself cannot contain anything else. And he was right in a way that goes far beyond the philosophical. Self-control isn't a secondary virtue, something nice to have but dispensable. It's the foundation on which everything else is built. Whoever doesn't control himself can't control his finances, because he'll make impulsive decisions when emotions are high. Can't control his relationships, because he'll say things in the heat he can't take back. Can't control his career, because he'll react badly at the exact moments when reacting well matters most. Everything is built on that foundation. And anger is exactly, with almost mathematical precision, the opposite of self-control. When you explode, in that exact moment, you're not demonstrating strength. You're demonstrating that something external has the power to knock you off center. Think about it with this clarity. When someone says something that pushes you over the edge and you explode, who has control in that moment? Not you, the person who said it. They pushed a button and you responded exactly as expected. Or worse, exactly as they didn't expect, but that benefits them, because now you're the one who lost control and they're the victim of your explosion. Now you're the problem. Now you're the one who has to apologize. Now you're the one who'll carry the consequences of what you said or did in that moment. And then they go on with their life. The weak man explodes because he has no other tool. Because when pressure rises and emotion takes him, there's nothing built inside that can contain it. No practice, no discipline. Not the kind of inner work that most men avoid, because it's more comfortable to blame the world for their reactions than to take responsibility for transforming them. The strong man chooses how to respond, not because he doesn't feel anger. He feels it exactly the same, perhaps more intensely, because men who've built something solid have more to protect and more reasons to feel something threatening it. But they learned not to act from emotion without first passing through thought. They learned that anger is information, not instruction. Anger informs you that something matters to you, that something crossed a line, that there's something that needs attention, that needs to be named, that needs a response. That information is valid. It's useful. It's even necessary. But it doesn't instruct you to destroy everything around you to prove it. That distinction between anger as information and anger as instruction is one of the most important you can make in your life. And it's not learned once. It's practiced, built, reinforced every time you choose to respond from thought instead of reacting from explosion. Marcus Aurelius governed the most powerful empire in the known world for nearly 2 decades. He had real enemies, not imaginary, not exaggerated. He had traitors within his own inner circle. He had generals who let him down at the most critical moments. And yet, those who knew him and those who studied his governance consistently describe a man who rarely lost his composure in public, who made the hardest and most painful decisions with a calm that wasn't indifference but absolute self-mastery. That wasn't a natural gift. That wasn't luck. It was the result of years of deliberate, conscious, disciplined practice, of writing every morning in that journal to remind himself who he wanted to be before the day began and circumstances started pushing, of applying Stoic principles, not when it was easy, but exactly in the moments when applying them was hardest, when the betrayal was real, when the pain was genuine, when the anger was completely justified, and nobody would have judged him for expressing it. He still chose not to, not because he repressed what he felt, but because he had built something more powerful than raw emotion. He had built the space, the same space we talked about in the previous episode, the space between stimulus and response where freedom lives. Marcus Aurelius inhabited it, cultivated it actively every day. And that cultivation, that daily practice of choosing who he wanted to be before circumstances decided for him, is what makes him the most powerful example of leadership under pressure that history has produced. And you? How many times did you explode in the last month? Don't think of it as destructive self-criticism that only produces guilt. Think of it as honest diagnosis. Every explosion is a data point. A data point that says, here's something you still haven't learned to manage. Here's a button others can push to knock you off center. Here's pending work. Data points aren't a sentence. They're a map. And a map only works if you use it. This is your assignment for this first lesson. For the next 7 days, every time you feel anger growing, before doing or saying anything, ask yourself one single question. This one: am I about to demonstrate strength or about to demonstrate that I've lost control? You need no more than 10 seconds to answer it. 10 seconds, one question, every day for 7 days. Those 10 seconds can completely change what happens next. Not because the question is magic, but because asking yourself that question is already inhabiting the space. It's already placing an instant of thought between stimulus and response. It's already choosing instead of reacting. Start today. Second Stoic lesson. Seneca wrote an entire treatise on anger, and his conclusion was devastating. No emotion has destroyed more cities, more families, and more men than this temporary madness. In the year 49 AD, Seneca wrote on anger. 3 books, not an essay, not a chapter. 3 complete books dedicated entirely to a single human emotion. When someone devotes that level of attention, that volume of analysis, to a single thing, they don't do it because the topic seems intellectually interesting from a safe distance. They do it because they've seen that topic destroy up close, because they've observed its effects with a regularity and an intensity that make it impossible to ignore, because they feel the urgency to document it, to analyze it, to warn the world about what it's doing without realizing it. Seneca wasn't someone who'd comfortably avoided anger from an easy life without pressure or injustice. He was exactly the opposite. He was a man who'd been exiled on an emperor's whim, who'd lost his world overnight without having done anything to justify it, who'd lived for 8 years on an island far from everything while watching others less capable, less upright, occupy the spaces he'd built over decades of work, who'd had real, verifiable, undeniable reasons to consume himself with anger, and who chose not to. Not because he didn't feel it, but because he studied it. He observed it from inside and outside, analyzed it with the detachment of someone who decides to understand something rather than simply suffer it. And after all that analysis, after having felt it firsthand and observed it in everyone around him, he reached a conclusion that has no nuance and no exceptions. No emotion has destroyed more. Not envy, which works slowly and silently. Not greed, which builds over time and has moments of restraint. Not fear, which paralyzes but rarely destroys instantly and irreversibly. Anger. Why anger above all others? Because anger acts fast. Envy needs weeks or months to materialize its damage. Greed needs opportunities and chained decisions. But anger can destroy in seconds what took you years to build. Can end in a single conversation, a 20-year relationship. Can close with a single phrase said in the heat, a door that took a decade to open. Can do in 30 seconds damage that takes years to repair, if it ever gets repaired at all. 1 second, one phrase, one decision made from emotional explosion, and everything changes. Seneca described in On Anger how anger physically transforms whoever harbors it, not just emotionally, not just relationally, physically. The face contracts and reddens, the eyes inflame, the jaw clenches, the hands tremble or close into fists, the voice shifts, register, the entire body transforms into something the man himself, if he could see himself from outside in that exact moment, wouldn't recognize as his own. That's not strength manifesting. That's an emotion that has taken you completely. That has displaced your reason and occupied its place. That is using your body, your voice, and your words to do something that you, in a calm state, would never choose to do. That's what Seneca called brief madness. And the word madness isn't casual. It's not exaggerated. It's precise. Because in a state of full anger, decisions aren't being made. You're being taken. Being used by an emotion that doesn't think, doesn't measure, doesn't consider consequences. That wants only one thing: to discharge. And that discharge, that momentary release that feels like relief the instant it occurs, always without a single exception in the history of humanity, has a price you pay. Not the one who provoked you, you. Seneca wrote something that has been true for 2,000 years, regardless of what era, what culture, what context you apply it in. No emotion is more eager for revenge, more forgetful of humanity, more stubborn in its pursuit, more hostile to itself than anger. Hostile to itself. Stop on those 3 words, because there lies the key to everything. Anger doesn't only destroy what's outside, it destroys itself, the one who harbors it, the one who feeds it, the one who defends it as part of their identity. Because the angry person lives in a state of permanent tension that wears down, always on the edge, always with the fuse lit, always one comment, one gesture, one piece of news away from blowing. That state of constant alertness isn't free. It has a physical, emotional, relational cost that accumulates year after year until the body and spirit present the bill. Think about the cities Seneca saw destroyed by anger. I'm not speaking only of wars between nations, though he spoke of those too. I'm speaking of the cities we build in our everyday lives and that we rarely name for what they are. The city that is your marriage or your partnership. That structure 2 people built brick by brick over years, with trust, with shared plans, with the decision to bet on someone. How many bricks has your anger knocked down in that city? How many cracks are in its walls that are still there because nobody fully repaired them after the last earthquake? The city that is your family. The children who watch you and learn from what they see, not from what you say. The parents or siblings with whom distance settled in after a conversation that went too far. The nieces and nephews who associate you not with the uncle or the figure they want nearby, but with someone you have to be careful not to provoke. The city that is your professional environment. The colleagues who stopped bringing you certain topics because last time didn't end well. The bosses or clients who valued you, but at some point saw something that made them doubt. The opportunities that went to someone more predictable, more stable, more emotionally reliable. How many of those cities have suffered earthquakes of anger? How many are still standing but with structural damage nobody mentions but everyone knows about? How many no longer exist? There are people who've carried anger for decades as if it were normal, as if that's just how it had to be, as if there were no other way to exist in the world. And the hardest thing to see in those people isn't their own suffering, though they suffer. The hardest thing is what they produce around them without wanting to, without seeing it, without understanding why the most important people in their lives keep slowly pulling away, even though nobody formally declared that something ended. The children who learn to walk on eggshells. The partner who measures every word before speaking because she doesn't know how you're going to react today. The friends who kept shrinking over the years until only those remain who tolerate your way of being, or who have enough distance not to get too exposed. The colleagues who respect you professionally but don't choose you for anything requiring close work over an extended period. That's what anger builds around you, not respect, fear and distance. And fear is not respect, never was and never will be. Fear is the response produced by unpredictability, by threat, by the ever-present possibility that anything could light the fuse. Respect is completely different. Respect is earned with consistency, with firmness without explosion, with the ability to hold center when everything moves and everyone around you is losing theirs. Which of the two do you want to produce in the people you love most? The question seems obvious, but anger doesn't listen to obvious answers. Anger only listens to whoever has deliberately decided, with work and with practice, to become its master instead of remaining its slave. Seneca dedicated 3 books to you. Today you have that warning in this episode. The question only you can answer is whether you're going to truly listen to it or let it pass as interesting information that changes nothing about what you do tomorrow when something lights your fuse. This is your assignment for this second lesson. Tonight, before you sleep, take 5 minutes, just 5. Sit with this. Think of the 3 most significant losses in your life that had anger as a direct cause or contributing factor. Don't analyze them yet. Don't look for justifications or explanations. Just name them honestly, one by one, with the real weight they carry. If you can write them down, write them. A relationship that didn't survive your explosions. An opportunity that left after you lost control at the wrong moment. A version of yourself you let go every time you chose to react instead of respond. Put a name to what your anger has cost you. That exercise isn't to produce guilt. Guilt without action is useless. It's to produce clarity, and clarity is the first real step toward change. Do it tonight, without excuses, without postponing it until you have more time or more energy or more desire. Tonight. Third Stoic lesson. Every time you let anger carry you away, you lost something you couldn't recover, whether it was someone's respect, an opportunity, or a part of yourself. There's a type of loss that doesn't appear on any balance sheet. You don't see it in your bank account. You don't measure it in pounds or years. You can't show it to anyone as concrete evidence that something went wrong, but you carry it. You carry it every day, even if you haven't named it yet. You carry it when you avoid thinking about certain moments because the memory has too much weight. You carry it when there are people with whom conversation no longer flows the way it used to, even though nobody said out loud what changed. It's the loss that anger left behind. And what's particular about this loss, what makes it different from almost any other you can suffer in life, is that it's permanent. When you lose money, you can recover it. When you lose a job, you can find another. When you lose time, you can reorganize and be more efficient with what remains. Almost everything life takes from you has some form of possible recovery, some path back, some possibility of rebuilding from where you were left. But what anger destroys in a moment can't always be rebuilt. Not in the same way, not completely. There are words that can't be taken back. Phrases said in the heat that get engraved in the memory of whoever heard them with a clarity that time doesn't erase. It doesn't matter how many times you apologize afterward. It doesn't matter how many times you explain you weren't yourself, that you were under enormous pressure, that you didn't mean it, that in that moment you weren't being who you really are. The person who heard them, processed them, integrated them into the image they have of you. And that image, once altered, rarely goes back to being exactly what it was before that moment. Think about the last time you lost control in front of someone who matters to you. Your partner, your child, your business partner, your friend of 20 years. What happened afterward? Maybe there was an apology. Maybe there was reconciliation. Maybe the next day everything seemed normal from the outside. Maybe you both agreed to move on and never mention what happened again. But something changed. Something subtle. Something that has no exact name, but that you both feel when you're together. A small distance that wasn't there before. A new reserve in choosing what they tell you. A doubt that didn't exist before when they wondered whether they could trust how you'd react to something difficult. That's the loss anger leaves behind. Not always dramatic, not always visible from outside, but real, cumulative, and long-term. Epictetus spoke about this with a clarity that can only belong to someone who observed the consequences of anger in the people around him without being able to do anything about it. From his position as a slave, without freedom to move, without being able to choose anything about his external life, Epictetus watched free men destroy with their emotional explosions exactly what they had. Men with resources, with options, with the real ability to choose, who used that ability to damage what they valued most in the moments anger took them. And meanwhile he, without external freedom of any kind, cultivated an inner freedom nobody could touch. What he saw was always the same. Whoever explodes, loses. Always loses something. Sometimes it's obvious. A relationship that ends with a conversation that went too far. A business deal that falls apart because of a decision made in the heat. A decades-long friendship that doesn't survive a night of unrestrained anger. Those are the big losses, the ones with names and dates, the ones you can point to in time and say, that's when everything changed. But the most costly ones are the others, the ones that have no name. The respect someone lost for you in silence and never told you because the conversation wasn't worth having anymore. The trust that eroded slowly, week after week, explosion after explosion, until one day you realize that person no longer counts on you for what they used to, no longer brings you the important problems, no longer asks your advice in the moments that truly matter. The version of yourself you could have been if you hadn't burned that opportunity, that relationship, that possibility, in a moment that lasted 30 seconds and whose effects lasted years. There's an example Seneca uses in On Anger that has been devastatingly precise for 2,000 years. He describes a man who in a fit of anger breaks a valuable object. In the moment of breaking it, he feels something like relief. The tension discharges at once. The body relaxes. The emotion finds the exit it was seeking with such urgency. And then he looks at what he broke, and he can't fix it. That object might be a ceramic jug, a door, a phone, but it might also be the trust of a child who watched his father lose control and who from that moment keeps a distance that didn't exist before. The respect of a team that saw their leader explode in front of a client, and that from that day obeys him but no longer follows him. The sense of safety of a partner who saw one time too many what the real limit of your self-control is, and who since then lives with a caution that exhausts both of you. The broken object doesn't get repaired. Broken trust doesn't either. Not completely. Not in the same way it was before that happened. And this is the hardest thing to accept for many people who believe apologizing is enough. That explaining the context will make everything go back to the way it was. That sincere regret completely erases the loss. It doesn't erase it. The apology can open a door toward repair, can begin a slow, genuine process of rebuilding, can be the first step of something real and lasting, but it doesn't return what was lost in the exact moment of the explosion. That already happened. That's already in the history of that relationship, that bond, that person who saw you at your worst and who now has that image alongside all the others they have of you. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his Meditations with a hardness that unsettles precisely because it's true. You cannot undo what you've already done. You can only choose what you do from now on. That sentence isn't resignation. It's not an invitation to give up or to accept that what's broken can't improve. It's clarity. It's the honest starting point of any genuine change. You can't recover what anger already destroyed, but you can stop destroying more. You can stop adding losses to the list. Stop adding new cracks to the structures still standing. You can choose, from this moment on, that what you have now isn't going to be the next victim of a second that lasts 30 and whose effects last years. The question that remains is the most practical of all. How? How do you do that when anger arrives? When something genuinely unjust happens and the emotion rises with a speed that seems to leave no time for any reflection? When the body is already activated and reason seems to have left the room without notice? That's exactly where practice comes in, not theory. Not the knowledge that anger destroys, which is true, but isn't enough to stop it when it's there. Practice. The brain processing a real emotional threat doesn't stop the anger response because it remembers Seneca said it was a brief madness. That process doesn't work in real time when emotion is high. What works is having built the habit of the pause before anger arrives. Having practiced the space in low-intensity moments so it's available when intensity rises. Having decided, in the calm of a quiet morning, how you want to respond when the calm is gone. That's exactly what the Stoics did. They didn't wait for the moment of crisis to decide who they wanted to be. They decided beforehand, every day. In the quiet of morning, before the world began to push, before the news came, the conflicts, the provocations, the moments that test everything you've built inside. This is your assignment for this third lesson. Think of one concrete loss that anger produced in your life. Just one. The one that carries the most weight when you remember it. Not necessarily the most recent, the most significant. The one that, when you bring it to mind, still has a weight you feel somewhere in your body. And ask yourself this question with the greatest honesty you can muster. How long did it take you to recover from that loss? Or haven't you fully recovered yet? Don't answer quickly. Sit with the question for at least 5 minutes. Let the real weight of that loss be present, not to punish yourself, to remember. So that the next time anger starts to rise, that memory is faster than the emotion and tells you, before you explode, what you already know about what comes after. Do it today. Fourth Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayals, wars, and the death of his children, and still wrote that being angry with the world is like being angry with fire for burning. There's a question that comes up almost every time controlling anger is discussed. The question sounds like this: what if I'm right? What if what they did to me was genuinely unjust? What if the betrayal was real and documentable? What if the damage was deliberate, not accidental? What if anyone in my place, with my exact circumstances, would have felt exactly what I felt? Do I have to control anger even then, even when the anger is completely justified by what happened? It's an honest question. And it deserves an honest answer. Yes, especially then. And Marcus Aurelius is the most powerful argument that exists for that answer. Because Marcus Aurelius didn't have a life sheltered from real injustice and genuine pain. He didn't govern from the comfort of an isolated palace where nothing disturbing reached him. His life was, in many ways, an accumulation of losses, betrayals, and pains that would have justified the anger of any human being who hadn't deliberately worked to build something more solid than the emotional reaction. Picture this scene with all the concreteness you can muster. You're the most powerful man in the known world. That's not a metaphor, it's literal. In the 2nd century AD, the Emperor of Rome holds power over the life and death of millions that has no equivalent in modern history. With one order, you can execute someone. With one decision, you can move entire armies. With your signature, you can change the fate of entire cities. And over the course of your years of governance, one after another, several of your children die. Not one, several. In an era where medicine can do nothing against diseases that advance without warning, where childhood life expectancy is brutally low, even for the children of the most powerful man in the world, Marcus Aurelius watched his children die while governing an empire at war and dealing with a plague devastating entire cities. The pain of a father who loses a child has no scale. It has no comparison with any other loss a human being can suffer. And Marcus Aurelius lived it more than once. Beyond that, he lived betrayals within his innermost circle. General Avidius Cassius, in whom he'd placed enormous trust, and to whom he'd given real power over entire eastern provinces of the empire, rebelled against him, proclaimed his own authority while Marcus Aurelius was on military campaign. This wasn't an unknown enemy. It was someone he'd trusted deeply. And he lived endless wars on the northern frontiers, years of military campaign in the brutal cold of the Danube, far from Rome, far from his family, leading men in situations where error doesn't produce an uncomfortable meeting, but real, irreversible deaths. Did he have reasons for anger? Absolutely. Real, verifiable reasons that no reasonable human being would have faulted him for. Did anger consume him? No. And not because he was a superhuman without emotions. Not because Stoicism had turned him into an unfeeling stone that doesn't process pain. But because he'd understood, through years of deliberate practice and daily reflection, something most men take a lifetime to grasp. That being angry with the world is being angry with nature. Being angry with fire for burning, with water for being wet, with winter for bringing cold. This idea, which can sound like passive resignation, if not properly understood, is actually the exact opposite. It's not giving up. It's not accepting injustice with a smile. It's not pretending pain doesn't hurt or that betrayal doesn't matter. It's something far more precise and far more useful than all of that. It's clarity about what you can control and what you can't. Fire burns. That's its nature, not its malice. Its nature. Being angry with it doesn't put it out, doesn't change it, doesn't make it less hot or less dangerous. It only consumes you, only wastes your energy, only keeps you in a state of agitation that weakens your ability to act effectively, while the fire keeps doing exactly what it's always done. People act from their nature, from their unresolved fears, from their unworked limitations, from their own wounds that nobody chose to have, and that form the invisible architecture of their decisions. Sometimes that nature produces betrayal. Sometimes it produces deliberate cruelty. Sometimes it produces real injustice that hurts, with a depth that defies easy description. Being angry with that doesn't change it. It only consumes you while the world goes on being what it is. But there's something critical that needs to be absolutely clear. This doesn't mean you don't act. Marcus Aurelius was not a passive man. He was the most active man of his era. He made decisions, corrected what could be corrected, set firm boundaries, responded to betrayals with appropriate consequences, did exactly what each situation required. But he did it from clarity, not from emotional explosion, from deliberate decision, not from automatic reaction, from the real power that self-control gives, not from the illusion of power that anger gives, and that always, without exception, ends up costing more than it produces. That difference is fundamental and deserves a pause. Acting with firmness from calm is not the same as reacting with intensity from anger. The external result may look similar in some cases. In both cases, you're responding to something that happened. In both cases, you're making a decision. But the cost is radically different. Action from calm produces chosen results. Reaction from anger produces consequences you didn't choose, and that frequently are worse than the original problem you wanted to solve. There's one last part of Marcus Aurelius's story worth bringing here: his son Commodus. Marcus Aurelius spent years preparing Commodus to be worthy of the power he would inherit, gave him the best available education, exposed him to Stoic principles from early on, entrusted him with progressive responsibilities so he'd learn from direct experience, did everything a conscious, deliberate father can do to transmit his values to the next generation. And Commodus became one of the cruelest, most unstable, and most destructive emperors in Roman history, undid much of what Marcus Aurelius had built. If there's a situation in history that justifies a father's and a leader's anger, that's it. And yet, in the Meditations, that private journal Marcus Aurelius wrote for himself, there's no anger toward Commodus. There's genuine concern, the sustained effort of a father who keeps trying to guide a son who doesn't want to be guided. The silent sadness of someone who watches the path taken by someone he loved and can't force him to take another, but no destructive anger. Because Commodus, like fire, acted from his nature, and being angry with that wouldn't have changed it. And in your life, how much energy have you invested in being furious with people who act exactly from the nature they've always had? With the colleague who always takes credit for others' work, who's done it since the first day you met him. With the family member who says exactly what hurts most at the worst possible moment, who's done it for years without exception. With the partner who always prioritizes their interests over yours when pressure rises, who's done it before and did it again. How much anger have you spent on winter for being cold? That energy has a double cost. The cost of what it destroys when it explodes, and the opportunity cost of everything it could have built if it had gone somewhere else. This is your assignment for this fourth lesson. Identify a situation that repeats in your life, something that lights you up with anger with a regularity you yourself could predict if you watched it from outside. Something that happens, that ignites you, that explodes in some form, that calms down, and that happens again. Ask yourself this question with total honesty. Is this winter being cold? Is this person or situation acting exactly from their nature, exactly as they've always acted? And am I choosing to be surprised and angry every time as if it were the first? If the answer is yes, the problem isn't the situation. The problem is the expectation, and adjusting that expectation to the reality of what is, instead of insisting on the frustration of what should be, is one of the most liberating internal shifts you can make in your life. Start with that situation. Today, fifth Stoic lesson. Anger promises you power, but delivers regret. Promises you justice, but delivers destruction. Promises you respect, but delivers loneliness. Anger lies. That's the first and most important thing you need to understand about it. It's not an honest emotion. It doesn't show you reality as it is. It shows you a distorted version, where exploding seems reasonable, where shouting seems effective, where destruction seems to produce something worth having. Anger is an emotion that makes promises. Promises that sound urgent and completely convincing at the exact moment they're made, and that it never keeps. The first promise is the oldest and most powerful of the three. Anger promises you power. When you're furious, there's a sensation of energy concentrating in the body with an intensity that has no parallel in almost any other emotional state. Adrenaline surges. The body fully activates. There's something that feels exactly like strength, like real capacity for action, like the certainty that this time things will be different, that this time the person who crossed the line is going to understand the real consequences of having done so. That sensation is real, but what it produces isn't power, it's the illusion of power. Because real power, the power that generates sustainable results in the world, the power people genuinely respect and that builds instead of destroys, doesn't come from emotional explosion. It comes from exactly the opposite pole, from calm, from clarity, from the ability to act, from thought instead of reaction, from firmness that doesn't need to raise its voice because it has something more convincing than volume. Whoever explodes in a negotiation doesn't get better terms. They lose them because they've signaled exactly where their emotional limit is, and the other party now knows how to manage them next time. Whoever shouts in an argument doesn't win it. They lose it, even when they're right, because now the debate isn't about who's right, but about who lost control. Whoever loses control in front of their team doesn't generate more effort or more commitment. They generate distance, silent resentment, and the gradual search for the exit by those worth the most. Anger promises power. It delivers exactly the opposite. The second promise is equally old and nearly as powerful. Anger promises you justice. When someone hurts you, when someone crosses a line that shouldn't have been crossed, when the injustice is real and verifiable and hurts with an intensity you can't ignore, there's in anger a promise that the explosion will balance something, that your fury will make the other person understand the real weight of what they did, that the pain you feel will somehow transfer to whoever produced it, that the scales will finally level. That promise is also completely false. Anger doesn't produce justice. It produces destruction. It destroys the situation that needed to be addressed with clarity and firmness. Destroys the conversation that could have led to a real, lasting resolution. Destroys the possibility that the other person will genuinely hear something you need to tell them, because now they're in defense mode, not listening mode. Destroys your credibility as someone who can speak from firmness and clarity instead of from emotional loss of control. Real justice, when it's possible to obtain, comes from clear, deliberate action, from direct conversation, from calm, from decisions made with a cool head, not with adrenaline at maximum. Anger doesn't bring you closer to any of those results. It pushes you away from all of them at once. And the third promise is the one that most deeply touches those who've built their identity around strength and character. Anger promises you respect. It whispers that if you don't explode, if you don't raise your voice, if you don't demonstrate that something matters to you with the intensity of fury, others will interpret that calm as weakness, that they'll think you let yourself get walked on, that you have no real limits, that they can do whatever they want to you without consequences, that being serene is being soft, and that's also a lie. Seneca analyzed it with a precision that hasn't lost a gram of accuracy in 2,000 years. Whoever acts from anger isn't respected. They're feared. And fear doesn't produce what respect produces. Fear constantly seeks a way to escape whatever generates it. Fear doesn't produce genuine loyalty or real trust, or the solid relationships a human being needs to build something worthwhile that lasts beyond the moment of intensity. Real respect is produced by something completely different, by the person who can tell you something difficult, looking you in the eye without needing to raise their voice for you to listen, who can set a boundary with a firmness that doesn't need explosion to be credible, who holds center when everything around them moves, who acts with determination without needing anyone to see them lose control to know they mean business. That person generates respect that lasts. The angry person generates fear that slowly converts into distance and the quiet search for the exit. There's something worth examining honestly about these three promises. Anger always makes them at the worst possible moment. At the moment of maximum emotional intensity, when the pain is fresh and real, when the injustice just happened and the body is activated and reason has the most limited access it'll have all day. That's exactly when anger says with the most conviction, "Explode, and this will get resolved." And that's exactly when you most need not to listen, because what comes after listening to it you already know. You know because it's happened before. The regret that arrives when the adrenaline drops and you see clearly what you left in your wake. The apology you have to construct to try to repair something that didn't have to break. The loneliness that remains, silent and heavy, when the people who matter most decide they need distance from someone whose limit of self-control they don't know with certainty. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his Meditations that sums this up with a precision that unsettles. Before you act, ask yourself whether what you're about to do produces the result you actually want to produce. Not the immediate result, the real result, the one you'll see tomorrow, next week, next year, when the intensity of this moment is just a memory and what remains are the consequences of what you chose to do while the emotion was high. That question, applied at the exact instant anger begins building its promises, is one of the most powerful tools in existence. Does what I'm about to do produce what I actually want to produce? Not what I feel I need to do right now to relieve the tension. Not what anger is promising me, what I want to happen afterward, when I'm no longer furious and have to live with the consequences of what I did in that moment. Because anger only sees the now. You can see further. And that ability to see beyond the moment of intensity, to ask about the real result before acting from emotion, is exactly the line that separates whoever anger controls from whoever controls anger. This is your assignment for this 5th lesson. The next time you feel anger building one of its promises, name it, out loud if you can, in silence if that's what the moment allows, but name it precisely. It's promising me power, it's promising me justice, it's promising me respect. And then ask yourself Marcus Aurelius's question, does what I'm about to do produce the result I actually want? Not in 10 minutes, in 10 seconds. Because those 10 seconds of naming the promise and asking about the real result can be exactly the difference between a decision that builds something solid and an explosion that destroys what took you years to raise. Practice it, not once, as an isolated exercise. Every time anger comes to promise you something. 6th Stoic lesson. When you explode with anger, you're not showing who you really are. You're showing who you become when you lose control of yourself. There's a phrase almost every man has said at least once after an explosion. The phrase sounds like this: "That wasn't me. When I said that, that wasn't me. When I did that, I wasn't being myself. Anger took me out of myself. I turned into another person in that moment. What you saw there isn't really me." That phrase has a serious problem. It's not true, not because whoever says it is dishonest, not because they say it to manipulate or deliberately evade responsibility, but because that belief that the version that explodes is an external visitor who arrives from outside and temporarily takes over the body is one of the most costly illusions you can maintain about yourself. Because the version that appears when you lose control is you. It's a version of you. A version that has existed inside you the whole time. That was there before the trigger happened. That appears when the layers of self-control and composure fall away because the moment's pressure exceeded what you'd built to contain it. It's not an imposter. It's the part of you that hasn't been worked on yet. Epictetus had a way of explaining this that left no room for comfortable self-deception. Picture this scene. You're in Nicopolis, in northwestern Greece. It's the 1st century AD. You're a philosophy teacher whose school draws students from across the Mediterranean world. You're a free man now, after having been a slave for a significant part of your life. And a young student approaches you with the question every man in every era has asked. "Teacher, When I get angry and do something I deeply regret, how can I say that wasn't me? And Epictetus responds with the calm of someone who's thought about this for decades. That is you when you haven't done the work. The work of philosophy isn't to give you interesting information about how the universe works. The work of philosophy is to transform you as a person, to change who you are when pressure rises and defenses drop, to build something solid inside that's present and available when everything outside pushes hard enough to topple what isn't well built. If that work hasn't been done, what appears when you explode is what's there. There's no better version waiting patiently behind the curtain. There's only the version you built with deliberate, consistent practice, or the unbuilt version that reacts from impulse when pressure exceeds the limits of what you can contain. And that has an implication that deeply unsettles most men when they see it with total clarity. It means the version that explodes isn't foreign to you. It's yours. It's the accumulated result of what you've done or failed to do with your inner life up to this point. Of the practices you adopted and the ones you abandoned. Of the work you did on yourself and the work you postponed for another moment that never came. Now, this is not a permanent sentence. It's not the claim that who you are now is who you'll always be, that the pattern is fixed and irreversible. It's exactly the opposite of that. It's the real foundation, the only honest foundation from which genuine, lasting change is possible. Because if the version that explodes were really an external imposter arriving to take you without your permission, if it were truly something completely foreign to you, then there'd be nothing to do about it except resign yourself. You'd be at the mercy of something beyond your reach. But if that version is yours, if it's the result of what's been built or not built inside you, then changing it is completely within your reach. And that's one of the most liberating pieces of news in existence. Marcus Aurelius understood this with a depth few have matched in history. The meditations that journal he wrote for himself and for no reader aren't primarily about the external world. They're not instructions for governing an empire. They're instructions for governing himself. Page after page, Marcus Aurelius writes about who he wants to be, about the gaps he observes between that person he wants to be and the person he is in moments of pressure and temptation, about the continuous, endless work of closing those gaps day after day without excuses and without giving up. He didn't write those things because being who he wanted to be came easily. He wrote them precisely because it didn't. He wrote them as a daily reminder, as a firm anchor, as the practice of choosing his best version before the day began, with its inevitable provocations, its real injustices, its moments that push toward the worst version of oneself. The most powerful man in the known world rose every morning and reminded himself who he wanted to be. Not because he'd reached that version definitively and forever, because he knew that without that active, daily reminder, the version that would appear under pressure wouldn't necessarily be the one he'd chosen to be. That the character he wanted required cultivation every day. That cultivating it was lifelong work, not a one-time conquest or an achievement you reach and store. And you? When was the last time you deliberately stopped to choose who you want to be when pressure rises? Not as an abstract concept, not as a fuzzy ideal you'd like to reach someday when you have more time, more calm, more resources, more of whatever you think you need to start that work. But with the real concreteness of someone who understands that choice is made every day or not made at all, that it's practiced or abandoned, that it's built brick by brick or crumbles, explosion after explosion. The version that appears when you explode isn't an accident. It's the result of what's been practiced or not practiced until now. And the version you want to appear the next time pressure rises, the one you want to be yours when everything pushes hard, is also the result of what you practice from this moment on. There's something more in this worth naming directly. Many men have built their identity around anger as a sign of character. They learned from childhood that not exploding means not caring. That calm is indifference. That whoever doesn't raise their voice when provoked is someone who lets themselves get walked on. That identity has deep roots. It doesn't disappear with a single conversation or a podcast episode. But there's a question worth asking. Has that identity served you? Has it produced what you wanted to produce? The relationships you want to have, the respect you want to generate, the life you want to build? Or has it been exactly what's cost you the most? That question doesn't need a verbal answer. It just needs honesty. This is your assignment for this 6th lesson. This week, choose one phrase. A short, concrete phrase that describes who you want to be exactly in the moment something ignites you. It can be as direct as this: I am who chooses before reacting. Or this: when I'm provoked, I respond from what I've built, not from what I feel in that second. The phrase you choose, in your own words, one that genuinely resonates with you, and repeat it every morning for 7 days before heading out into the world. Not as an empty positive thinking exercise, as the kind of deliberate work Marcus Aurelius did in his journal every morning while governing the most powerful empire in the known world. If that work was important enough for him, with everything he had on his hands, it's probably important enough for you too. 7th Stoic lesson. Epictetus taught that if someone makes you angry, it's your own judgment that makes you angry, and that judgment is under your control, even if you don't believe it. This is the hardest of the 10 lessons. Not because it's complicated in intellectual terms. Its logic is quite clear when you hear it for the first time. It's hard because it contradicts something we feel with almost physical certainty in the moment we're angry. Something that seems so obvious, so directly verifiable by immediate experience, that questioning it seems almost absurd when emotion is high. When someone says something that hurts, the immediate, irresistible sensation is this: they did this to me. They made me angry. Their words produced my anger. Their action caused my reaction. The chain of causation is direct, obvious, undeniable. They acted. You reacted. How could it be otherwise? Epictetus spent decades teaching that this apparent chain of causation, the one that feels so direct and irrefutable, has an invisible link in the middle. A link most people never notice because it happens too fast to detect without deliberate training. Between what someone does and the anger you feel, there's an intermediate step. A judgment. Your judgment. The automatic, instantaneous evaluation your mind makes about what just happened, whether what happened is a threat or not, whether it's an injustice, whether it's an insult or a sign of contempt or an attack on something you deeply value. That evaluation, that judgment produced in fractions of a second that the conscious eye can't capture, is what produces the anger, not the event itself. Your interpretation of the event. Epictetus used an example that has been perfectly clear and perfectly effective for 20 centuries. If someone insults you in a language you don't understand, does it make you angry? No. Why not? The words are exactly the same. The tone might be the same. The intent to harm might be identical. But because you don't understand the language, no evaluation is possible. Without evaluation, there's no judgment. Without judgment, there's no threat signal that triggers anger. The event is identical in both cases. The reaction is completely different, because what produces anger isn't the event. It's the judgment you make about the event, and that judgment is yours. Always has been. Even when it's produced at a speed that makes it feel automatic and inevitable. Even when the threat evaluation happens before your conscious mind has time to intervene. Even in those cases, The judgment occurs inside you, is produced by your mind, and with deliberate practice and sustained work can be modified over time. This has implications that go far beyond how you handle anger. It means the inner freedom. Epictetus taught that freedom nobody can take from you isn't a poetic metaphor or a pleasant attitude toward life. It's something concrete and practicable. It's the real ability to intervene in the evaluation process before the evaluation produces the reaction. Return to the scene of Epictetus with his master Epaphroditus, his leg being deliberately and cruelly twisted. The physical pain is real and undeniable. No judgment or philosophical practice changes the pain signal the body sends. The body feels it with all the rawness that real physical pain has. But the anger, the explosion, the loss of control that does have a judgment in the way. The judgment Epictetus didn't make was this: this destroys me. This takes from me something fundamental. I won't be able to recover. This is a threat to who I am at the deepest level. What Epictetus thought, what can be inferred from everything he taught over decades, was something radically different. This is happening to my body. My body is not completely me. What I am, what defines me, what depends on me, and that nobody can touch without my permission, remains completely intact. That different judgment produced a different response. Serenity, where there could have been explosion. Calm, where there could have been uncontrolled fury. Inner freedom, where there could have been absolute emotional slavery. What Epictetus taught was neither simple nor quick to develop. It wasn't a technique that works in the first week of practice. It was the result of years of constant work, of philosophy lived as daily character training, and not simply as a set of interesting ideas to contemplate from comfort. The most important part of that training was this: learning to pause between stimulus and judgment, learning to notice the judgment before the judgment produces the reaction, learning to ask yourself whether the judgment you're about to make is the most accurate, the most useful, the most aligned with who you want to be and the results you want to produce. The initial judgment isn't always wrong. Sometimes something is genuinely a threat and the danger judgment is completely correct. Sometimes someone truly acted badly and the judgment that something unacceptable happened is totally accurate. But even then, the judgment that you should explode, that uncontrolled anger, is the appropriate response. That losing center produces something good. That judgment is almost always wrong. And that's exactly the judgment Epictetus taught to question. Not whether the harm was real, but whether the emotional explosion is the best possible response to real harm. Seneca added something to this that makes it even more concrete and applicable in everyday life. He wrote that the greatest remedy for anger is delay. Not the suppression of emotion, not pretending you feel nothing or that what happened didn't affect you, not denying that something occurred and deserves some kind of response. Delay. The time you place between stimulus and response, that time, even if it's seconds, creates the space for the initial judgment, which is frequently the most reactive and least accurate of all the ones your mind could make, to be reviewed by something more reflective, more deliberate, more aligned with what you actually want to produce. How many times in your life would a delayed response, a conversation held 2 days later instead of in the hottest moment, have produced a completely different and far better result for everyone involved? You don't need to answer that out loud. You just need to be honest with yourself. This is your assignment for this 7th lesson. The next time something ignites you, before responding in any way, give yourself 10 real physical seconds. Not 10 minutes, 10 seconds. And in those 10 seconds, ask yourself one question: what judgment am I making about what just happened? Not to necessarily change the judgment, to notice it, to recognize it exists. To know that between what happened and what you feel, there's a step that's yours, that occurs inside you, and that with practice can be intervened before it produces a response you're going to regret. 10 seconds. One question. The next time something lights the fuse. 8th Stoic lesson. The man who gets angry easily is a predictable man, and the predictable man is one anyone can manipulate by simply pressing the right button. There's something about anger that nobody mentions enough. Something that completely changes the way you see it when you understand it clearly and without filters. Your anger isn't just yours. It's an instrument available to anyone who knows you well enough. An instrument that can be used when needed, with an efficiency that should deeply disturb you when you see it without the habit that normalizes it. Think about the last time someone pushed you over the edge. What happened exactly? They said something in a tone they knew would activate you, or took a position on something that's one of your known triggers, or pointed something out in a way they know produces a predictable response in you, and you exploded. Or raised the tone of the conversation, or said something you shouldn't have said, or made a decision from high emotion that with a cool head you never would have made. And them? What exactly did they get out of it? The conversation centered on your reaction rather than what they'd done or said. They came out as the reasonable party, and you as the one who lost control. The axis of the debate shifted exactly where they needed it to go. You lost position in the negotiation, in the argument, in the power dynamic of that relationship. Was it deliberate? Sometimes yes, sometimes completely and with full awareness. Sometimes not. Sometimes it was a dynamic that developed without anyone consciously planning it, but the result is the same in both cases. When you're predictable in your anger, when there are identifiable buttons that produce known responses with a regularity anyone observing you can learn, you give those around you something you don't have in that moment: control of the situation. You think you're responding with strength. You're responding exactly as expected, exactly as it was convenient for someone else that you respond. That's not strength. It's the most exploitable vulnerability there is. Marcus Aurelius understood this strategic dimension of calm with a clarity that led him to cultivate it deliberately, not only as an ethical practice, but as a tool of real power in the most demanding context there is. He governed the largest empire in the known world, had external and internal enemies, had people actively working to destabilize him, seeking his points of fragility, seeking to produce reactions in him that would benefit them. A leader who can be easily ignited is a leader who can be managed by anyone who learns where his buttons are. A leader who remains serene when everyone expects him to explode. When the provocation is obvious and the stimulus deliberate, that leader controls the narrative, maintains the initiative, doesn't reveal emotional vulnerability points to those who could use them against him. Calm isn't just an ethical virtue. It's a real strategic advantage in any context where interests are at stake. Seneca put it in a way that applies equally in the 1st century and in any negotiation, difficult conversation, or clash of interests today. Whoever knows they can be ignited has a weakness that any adversary, sooner or later, will find and use. Do you have adversaries in your life? Perhaps not in the dramatic sense of declared enemies with a name and face, but you do have people with whom at some point you'll have interests that don't align with yours, people with whom you'll negotiate something that matters, people with whom you'll have conversations where whoever maintains calm has a real advantage over whoever explodes. How much are you making their job easier by being so predictable in your reactions? There's a dimension of this that goes beyond the dynamic with other people and deserves to be named. The predictability of your anger also produces something in your relationship with yourself. When you know there are certain topics certain tones, certain types of comments that will ignite you almost without exception. That predictability produces internally something quiet but powerful. The feeling that you don't have full control of your own emotional life, that you're reactive in areas you didn't choose to be reactive in, that there are parts of you that run more on automatic than by conscious decision. That feeling isn't comfortable, and it shouldn't be. Because the freedom the Stoics sought, that inner freedom Epictetus cultivated even in the most absolute physical slavery, isn't compatible with being predictable in your emotional reactions. Real freedom includes the freedom to choose how to respond. Even when something genuinely ignited you, even when the provocation was deliberate and the damage real, even when you have every right in the world to feel what you feel. Epictetus taught it from the most extreme possible experience. You can't control what others do. You can't control what they say to you or what they try to do to you. But you can control whether you give them the power to activate your anger when they need it. That control is yours, but it only exists if you actively build it. If you don't build it, it de facto belongs to whoever knows where your buttons are, and they'll use it when they need it. There's one last thing about the predictability of anger worth naming before closing this lesson. Predictable anger also limits your freedom of movement in important situations. When everyone knows certain topics ignite you, they start avoiding bringing you those topics. They start filtering what they tell you to keep from activating the explosion. They start managing the conversation around your triggers instead of having the conversation they actually need to have with you. That doesn't just deprive you of important information, it deprives you of the real trust of the people who matter most. And without that trust, without the certainty that they can bring you anything, without first calculating how you'll react, the relationships that matter most get built on a foundation of avoidance that, over time, hollows them out. This is your assignment for this 8th lesson. Identify one button. Just one. Something concrete, a specific topic, a particular type of comment, a tone or way of saying something that practically guarantees you'll react with anger when it appears. Something that works in you almost like an automatic mechanism that other people, consciously or unconsciously, can activate when they need to. Name it precisely. Write it down if you can. And ask yourself this question: how many times in the last year did someone activate that button and get exactly the reaction they needed from you while you believed you were responding with strength? Not to produce shame, to produce real motivation. Knowing you have a button others can activate is the first step to deactivating it. And deactivating it begins with one single decision, that the next time someone presses that button, you're going to notice it, recognize exactly what's happening, and consciously choose not to follow the predictable script they expect. Once, the next time it happens, that's enough to start breaking the pattern. And breaking the pattern once makes it easier to break it the next time. There's more about the 8th lesson that deserves expansion before continuing, because the predictability of anger isn't just a strategic problem in moments of conflict. It's an everyday problem that installs itself in every interaction, every conversation, every shared space with the people who matter most. Think about what happens inside a family when someone has predictable anger. The children learn to calculate, learn to assess the adult's emotional state before speaking, learn which topics are safe and which light the fuse. Learn to navigate around the buttons instead of having the direct, open relationship any child should be able to have with their father or mother. That's not a normal childhood. It's a childhood organized around managing someone else's emotional risk. And those children learn something they carry with them forever: that adult emotions are unpredictable and dangerous, and that the way to be safe is to anticipate and avoid. That learning doesn't disappear when they grow up. They carry it into their own relationships, their own homes, the way they relate to the world. Predictable anger has a generational cost nobody calculates, but it exists, and it's enormous. Seneca wrote something that closes this lesson with a precision that needs no elaboration. Whoever cannot control their temper is governed by it. And whoever is governed by their temper is governed by anyone who knows how to activate it. Think about it with all the honesty you can. Are you governing your life? Or is it being governed by your temper? The answer determines everything else. This is your expanded assignment for this 8th lesson. In addition to identifying the button I already asked you to name, this week I want you to observe in silence, without doing anything yet, how the people who live with you or work near you navigate around your triggers, what they avoid telling you, what topics they don't bring up, how they calibrate their words before speaking, not to feel bad, to see clearly the real cost that your predictability has on the relationships that matter most. Observe, without defending yourself, without explaining, just observe. What you see that week will tell you more about the work ahead than anything else you could read or hear. There's a question that naturally emerges after these 3 lessons, the 6th, 7th, and 8th, that converge on the same central point. Why is it so hard to change even when you understand it intellectually? Why can you know that anger is destructive, that your judgment is intervenable, that you're predictable to those who know you, and still keep exploding in the moments where it costs you most not to? The answer is uncomfortable, because understanding isn't the same as changing. Knowledge lives in the mind. Character lives in the body, in habits, in responses that have been repeated so many times, they no longer require conscious decision to activate. Changing character requires something different from knowledge. It requires repeated practice in real conditions. It requires making mistakes and trying again without giving up. It requires exactly the kind of work the Stoics called ascesis, not mortification or punishment, but deliberate training. The same discipline an athlete applies to the body applied to the inner life. Marcus Aurelius understood it. He didn't write his meditations because he'd already achieved perfect calm. He wrote them because he knew that without daily training, calm didn't arrive on its own when he needed it. Epictetus lived it. He didn't reach inner freedom through sudden inspiration. He built it in the most adverse conditions possible, where the only alternative to building it was being destroyed by them. Seneca documented it. He didn't write on anger from the position of someone who never gets angry. He wrote it from the honesty of someone who knows anger intimately and decided to understand it rather than surrender to it. All 3 say the same thing from different places. Change isn't produced by understanding. It's produced by practicing. And practice starts where you are now. Not when you have more time. Not when circumstances are more favorable. Not when you feel more prepared. Now, with the next provocation that arrives. With the next moment, the fuse lights, and you have the opportunity to choose instead of react. That's where the work happens. Not in the readings. Not in podcast episodes. Not in conversations about Stoicism. In that exact moment where everything pushes you to explode, and you decide, even if for the first time, even if imperfectly, to do something else. That moment is enough to begin. 9th Stoic lesson. Your anger doesn't punish the one who offended you. Your anger punishes you while the other person goes on with their life without knowing or caring what you feel. This lesson is perhaps the most liberating of the 10 if you receive it with the honesty it deserves. And it's also the one that meets the most resistance. Because there's something in anger that feels like justice. Something that says, if it hurts me, it should hurt them too. If I'm suffering the consequences of what they did, it's only fair they feel them too. My anger is the way that gets balanced. That reasoning has a fatal flaw. Anger doesn't work that way. Your anger doesn't reach the person who offended you the way you think it does. There's a scenario Seneca described with a clarity that has been completely applicable for centuries because human nature hasn't changed. Picture this moment. Someone hurt you. It may have been hours ago or weeks. It may have been a betrayal, an insult, an injustice, a rejection, a humiliation. The event already happened. It's already in the past. But you keep carrying the anger of that moment as if it were still happening. While you carry it, what is that person doing? In most cases, living their life, sleeping, eating, working, talking with other people, thinking about their own problems and their own projects, without knowing that you're still burning energy on the anger left by what they did, without caring in many cases that the anger exists, and you, meanwhile, stay in the fire. Seneca called it the trap of the grudge holder. You think you're punishing the other, but you're punishing yourself with your own hands, and the other doesn't even know you're in the bonfire. Epictetus had an even more direct image, grabbing a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone. Who does it burn first? You. Always you first. And sometimes only you. Because the coal can cool before it arrives, can fall on the ground, may never reach the destination you intended. But while you hold it in your hand, the damage is already happening. To you, to your body, to your mind, to your peace. That's not justice. That's self-destruction disguised as revenge. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his Meditations that sounds simple but contains enormous depth. Ask yourself whether the person who offended you is still thinking about what they did. In most cases, the answer is no. They moved on. What was a significant wound for you was for them a moment that already passed. That doesn't mean what they did doesn't matter. It means continuing to carry the anger of that moment only harms you. It doesn't reach them. It doesn't make them reflect. It produces no kind of real justice. It only keeps you in the fire while they go on with their life. There are people who've carried anger for years, decades, over events that happened long ago. Anger at a father who wasn't there, at a partner who betrayed, at someone who, at a critical moment, made a decision that changed the course of something important. At an institution, a system, people who in many cases don't even know that anger exists. And that anger, carried for years, hasn't done anything to them, but it's shaped the life of whoever carries it. It occupied space that could have gone to building something, consumed energy that could have gone to creating something, colored with bitterness relationships that could have been different, closed doors that could have been open. All of that paid by you, without the recipient of the anger knowing or caring. This isn't an argument for forgiving superficially or pretending injustices don't matter. Injustices matter. Real harm deserves to be named, processed, addressed when addressing it is possible. None of that is being denied. What's being understood is that carrying anger indefinitely doesn't address the injustice. It only harms you. The Stoic response to injustice isn't sustained anger. It's clear action when action is possible, and release when action isn't possible. Both from calm, both from clarity, both from the understanding that your energy is finite, and spending it on anger over what you can no longer change is the most costly waste there is. This is your assignment for this 9th lesson. Think of an anger you've been carrying for a while. It may be recent, or it may be years old. Something that still has temperature when you think about it. Something that still consumes energy when it enters your mind. And ask yourself this question, with all the honesty you can: who is that anger harming right now? The person who caused it, or you? You don't need a long answer. The answer is short. And if it's honest, it'll tell you everything you need to know about whether it's worth continuing to carry. 10th Stoic lesson. Today you're going to start seeing your anger for what it really is. Not a signal that something's wrong out there, but a signal that there's something to work on in here. This is the most important of the 10 lessons. The one that changes everything if you receive it completely. Because the 9 previous lessons spoke about what anger destroys, what it costs, the promises it doesn't keep, the way it makes you predictable and manipulable, how it punishes you more than anyone. But this lesson speaks about something different. This lesson says that anger isn't just a problem. It's also information. Specific, valuable information that points towards something real inside you that deserves attention. When anger surges, there's always something beneath. Always. Without exception. It might be fear. The fear of losing something you deeply value. The fear of not being enough. The fear of what you built crumbling. The fear of not being respected. The fear that someone will see something in you that you don't want seen. It might be a wound, something in your history that hasn't been fully processed. An experience of abandonment, of humiliation, of betrayal that left a scar that still hurts when something brushes it, even though it doesn't show from outside. It might be accumulated frustration, the feeling that you've been making an effort for a long time that isn't recognized, that you've been putting in more than you get back for a long time, that the expectations you have about how things should work aren't being met, and nobody seems to notice. Anger is the way all of that reaches the surface. Not always intelligently, not always at the right moment, not always directed at what actually caused it, but always pointing towards something real. Epictetus taught this with a clarity that comes from having observed the human condition from the inside, and from a distance, slavery gave him without asking. The man who gets angry easily at the external world is frequently someone who has an internal battle he hasn't been willing to look at directly. Anger directed outward is frequently the way we avoid looking at what's inside. That's not weakness, it's human. But recognizing it completely changes the relationship you have with your own anger. Because if anger is information about something inside that needs attention, then the question you should ask when it appears isn't, how do I get revenge on whoever caused it? The question is, what is this telling me about myself? What's beneath this anger? What matters so much to that part of me that reacts this way when someone touches it? What fear, what wound, what frustration is reaching the surface right now? Those questions aren't easy to ask when emotion is high. That's why the practice of the space, which we discussed in the previous episode and applied in several of these lessons, is so fundamental. Because the space doesn't just keep you from exploding, it also creates the possibility of asking those questions before emotion takes control. Seneca wrote in On Anger something that sums up this lesson with a precision that hasn't aged a single day. Whoever knows the causes of their anger has half the work done. And he was right in a way that goes far beyond the psychological. When you understand why what angers you, when you see the fear or the wound or the frustration beneath, anger loses part of its power. Not all, but part. Because it's no longer an incomprehensible monster arriving out of nowhere. It's something yours that has a name and that you can work on. Marcus Aurelius practiced this very concretely in his meditations. Every time he registered a moment of anger or temptation toward anger, he examined it, didn't judge it, examined it, asked himself what had generated that emotion, what part of his values, his expectations, his fears had been touched, and from that clarity decided how he wanted to respond. Not always perfectly, never perfectly, but with more awareness each time, with more ability to choose each time, with more space between stimulus and response each time. That's exactly what this 10th lesson proposes. Not achieving perfection, not eliminating anger from your life as if that were possible or desirable, but changing the relationship you have with it, going from being its victim to being its observer, going from reacting from it to asking what it's signaling, going from using it as fuel for destruction to using it as information for inner work. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens exactly as it happened in Marcus Aurelius, in Seneca, in Epictetus, one day at a time, one situation at a time, one choice at a time. This is your assignment for this 10th lesson. For the next week, every time you feel anger surge, before doing anything, ask yourself 3 questions in this order. The first, what's beneath this? Is it fear? Is it a wound? Is it accumulated frustration? The second, is this anger informing me of something I need to attend to inside, or am I about to use it to destroy something outside? The third, what would the man I want to be choose to do here? You don't have to have perfect answers to those questions. You just have to ask them, because the act of asking already creates the space. You're already the observer instead of the victim. You're already choosing instead of reacting. And that, though it may seem small, is exactly the kind of work that transforms character over time. One day at a time, one situation at a time, one choice at a time. Today, it starts here. We've reached the end of this episode. 10 Stoic lessons on anger. 10 truths built on centuries of observation, real suffering, and deliberate practice by 3 men who reached the same conclusions from completely different places. Let's walk through what we saw together. The first lesson showed us that anger disguises itself as strength, but is exactly the opposite. That the truly strong man doesn't need to explode to earn respect, because he's built something more powerful than emotional explosion. The second showed us that Seneca dedicated 3 complete books to documenting what anger destroys, because he'd seen the process from the inside and understood that no emotion acts with such speed and such permanent damage as this brief madness. The third showed us that the losses anger leaves are frequently irreversible. That word said, "In the heat, stay engraved." That broken trust doesn't fully repair, that what you destroyed in 30 seconds can take years to recover from, if it ever recovers. The fourth showed us that Marcus Aurelius, with every reason in the world for anger, with real losses and betrayals and pain, chose not to be consumed by it, because he understood that being angry with the world is being angry with fire for burning. That calm isn't resignation, it's clarity about what you can control. The fifth showed us that anger makes 3 promises it never keeps. It promises power and delivers impotence, promises justice and delivers destruction, promises respect and delivers fear and distance. The sixth showed us that the version that explodes is you. It's not an imposter, it's the part that hasn't been worked on. And recognizing that, though it unsettles, is the only foundation from which real change is possible. The seventh showed us that between what happens and the anger you feel there's a judgment, your judgment, and that judgment, though it's produced in fractions of a second, is yours and can be intervened with practice. The eighth showed us that predictable anger is vulnerability, not strength. That anyone who knows you well enough can use it when they need to. That calm is a real strategic advantage in any context where interests are at stake. The ninth showed us that your anger doesn't punish whoever offended you. It punishes you. That holding the burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone only burns you while the other goes on with their life. And the 10th, the most important of all, showed us that anger isn't just a problem, it's information. It points towards something real inside that deserves attention. and that when you learn to ask it what it's signaling instead of simply discharging it, your relationship with it changes completely. The phrase you carry from this episode is the same one that opened everything you heard today. Anger impoverishes you. Every time you feel it growing, every time something lights the fuse, every time you're about to explode. Remember this: anger impoverishes you. Not just in money, in respect, in relationships, in opportunities, in inner peace, in everything that truly matters when the day ends and you're left alone with yourself. In the next episode, we're going to talk about fear. If anger is the emotion that destroys outward, fear is the one that paralyzes inward. They're two sides of the same emotional coin that governs most people without them knowing it. And fear has paralyzed you more times than you want to admit. Kept you from making decisions you wanted to make. Kept you in places you no longer wanted to be. Made you retreat exactly when you most needed to advance. The next episode is called Fear Doesn't Protect You, It Buries You. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. Before that next episode arrives, there's something that needs to be clear about everything you heard today. Knowledge doesn't change anything on its own. Knowing that anger is a brief madness, as Seneca called it, doesn't stop anger when it comes. Knowing that anger punishes you and not the other doesn't calm the fuse when it lights. Knowing your judgment is intervenable doesn't intervene the judgment automatically. Knowledge is the map. The work is walking. And the road is walked exactly where you are now. Not on a spiritual retreat. Not when you have more time. Not when circumstances are more favorable. In your everyday life. In the conversations you already have. In the moments where you already explode or are about to. That's where the real work happens. Marcus Aurelius understood that better than anyone, because he didn't have the luxury of practicing Stoicism under ideal conditions. He practiced it with wars on top of him, with betrayals within, with losses that have no comparison to most of what any ordinary human faces in an entire lifetime. And still he chose the work, every day, in the only moment that exists for choosing. Now, Seneca said it with an urgency that has been completely valid for 2,000 years. Don't leave the work on yourself for tomorrow. Tomorrow has its own provocations, its own pressures, its own moments where the fuse lights. And if you built nothing today, tomorrow you'll arrive the same as today. Time doesn't build character on its own. Work builds character. And the work begins in the only moment you can always begin. There's one last thing worth saying before closing this episode. The anger you've carried until now doesn't define who you're going to be. The explosions of the past aren't the sentence of the future. What defines who you're going to be is what you decide to do from this moment with what you know. Whether you let it pass as interesting information that changes nothing, or whether you carry it with you as the first brick of something worth building. The three men who accompanied you today chose to build. Seneca, from the exile of an arid island. Marcus Aurelius from the Danube frontier, with the weight of the world in his hands. Epictetus, from the most absolute slavery, with a broken leg. None of the three had ideal conditions. None of the three waited to have them. All three decided the work was possible where they were, with what they had, in the moment they were given to live. And you? Where are you right now? Probably in better conditions than any of the three, with more freedom, more resources, more possibilities. The question is whether you're going to use those conditions to build something worthwhile. Anger impoverishes you. That's the truth this episode leaves you with. And the wealth you build, when you master it, when you convert it from enemy to information, when you stop being its victim and become its observer, that wealth has no price. It can't be bought. It's built. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One situation at a time, starting now. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. But there's something more that needs to be said about the close of these 10 lessons. Because finishing an episode like this with a list of what you learned, though useful, isn't enough. It's not how knowledge converts into real change. Real change happens when something you heard becomes so personal, so yours, that you can't see your anger the same way as before. So let me ask you something directly. Of the 10 lessons we walked through today, which one hit you hardest? Not the one you found most intellectually interesting, the one that hit you, the one that, when you heard it, produced something uncomfortable somewhere inside because it touched something you recognize as true in your own story. It might have been the 5th, when we talked about the 3 promises anger doesn't keep. Maybe because you recognized you've spent years believing exploding produces respect when it actually produces fear. It might have been the 9th, when we talked about your anger not punishing the other but punishing you. Maybe because there's someone specific in your life toward whom you've been carrying an anger that has only cost you while the other goes on with their life. It might have been the 10th, the deepest of all, when we talked about there always being something beneath anger, a fear, a wound, a frustration. Maybe because there's something inside you've been avoiding looking at directly for a long time. That lesson, the one that hit hardest, is your entry point. Don't try to work on all 10 at once. Start with one, the one that hurts most, the one that generates the most resistance, the one you most feel needs work. That's where real change begins for you specifically, not for everyone equally, for you, with your history, with your triggers, with your patterns, with the specific losses anger has left in your life that only you know completely. Seneca said it with a directness that leaves no room for postponement. The greatest obstacle to living is the wait for a better moment that never comes. While you wait for the ideal moment to start the work, life keeps passing. Explosions keep happening. Losses keep accumulating. And the distancing from the people who matter most keeps growing in silence. There is no better moment than this one. There are no more favorable conditions than the ones you have right now. There's work. And there's the decision to do it or not. Marcus Aurelius wrote it in his Meditations with a simplicity that leaves no escape. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Anger isn't just your obstacle, it's also your raw material. The work you do with it, the way you learn to observe it instead of being its victim, the way you learn to ask what it signals instead of simply discharging it, that's exactly the kind of inner strength that can't be faked, can't be bought, and can't be inherited. It's built in the difficult moments, with the real triggers, with the people who matter most to you and who have the greatest ability to knock you off center. There, in those exact moments, is where the character worth having is forged. Anger impoverishes you when you let it be your master, and it teaches you when you learn to be its master. That's the transformation this episode offers you, not as an empty promise, as the real path of 3 men who walked it before you, from exile, from the throne, from slavery, and who arrived at the same place from 3 completely different starting points. The place where anger no longer governs you, the place where you govern it. That place exists, and the path to it starts where every path worth taking always starts. Here, now, with the next choice you have in front of you. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. There's one final truth this episode cannot close without saying. Not everything in your history with anger is your fault. Many men learned to explode because that's what they saw, because that was the model they were given, because someone before them also exploded and never worked on what was beneath, because in the environments where they grew up, Anger was the way to earn respect, to not get walked on, to exist with presence in a world that otherwise didn't see you. That's real, and it deserves to be named. Not to use as a permanent excuse, but to see it with the clarity it deserves. What you inherited you didn't choose, but what you do with it from now on is your choice. Epictetus didn't choose to be born a slave, but he chose what to do with that condition. Marcus Aurelius didn't choose to be born in the most demanding historical moment of the Roman Empire, but he chose what kind of man he was going to be within that moment. Seneca didn't choose to be exiled by an emperor's whim, but he chose to use that exile to produce some of the deepest reflections on the human condition that have survived to this day. None of the three chose their starting points. All three chose their responses, and that same choice is available to you right now. It doesn't matter where your anger comes from. It doesn't matter how deeply rooted it is. It doesn't matter how many years it's been part of what you believe you are. The choice to start working on it, to start observing it instead of being its victim, to start asking it what it signals instead of simply discharging it, that choice is yours. Here, now, with the next situation that arrives, not with the last one that already passed. With the next one, anger impoverishes you when you let it be your master, and it strengthens you when you learn to work with what it signals. That's the difference between whoever repeats the cycle and whoever breaks it, and you can be the one who breaks it, if you decide to. Today, this is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. One last reflection before this episode truly ends. There's a question Seneca asked himself at the end of every day. He left it documented in his letters, those letters to Lucilius he wrote in the final years of his life, with the urgency of someone who knows time is finite and that what isn't transmitted now may never be transmitted. The question was this: in what did you improve today? Not what did you achieve, not what did you produce, not how far did you advance on your external goals. In what did you improve today as a person? Were you a little more patient than yesterday? Did you respond from calm in a moment where before you would have exploded? Did you make the pause, even though it was small, and even though it wasn't perfect? Did you observe the anger, instead of just suffering it? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then the day wasn't in vain. Even if you failed at other things, even if the day was hard, even if anger won at other moments. If in just one you chose differently, the day had something worthwhile, and that accumulates day after day, choice after choice, until one day you realize the person responding to difficult situations is no longer the same one who responded before, that something changed, that the space between stimulus and response got bigger, that the triggers that used to activate you automatically now produce something different, a pause, a question, a choice. That's stoic work in action. Not dramatic, not transformative overnight, cumulative, quiet, solid, like everything worth building. Anger impoverishes you, but the work of taming it enriches you in ways that have no price. Deeper relationships, because people can get close without calculating the risk. Clearer decisions, because you don't make them from adrenaline. Opportunities that arrive, because you no longer burn them before they can bear fruit. Inner peace, built brick by brick, instead of crumbling explosion after explosion. And genuine respect from the people who matter most, not the fear of those who avoid you, but the real respect of those who choose to be near you. That's what you build when you master anger. That's what you've been missing every time you let it master you. And that's what awaits you when you decide the work starts today. Not tomorrow, today, with the next situation that arrives. This is Stoicism for winners. This is Master Your Mind. Now comes the part that separates those who listen from those who truly change. This community exists because you decide it exists, not with words, with actions. If something you heard today moved you inside, leave your reflection here. The one that gets the most support becomes the banner of this community, the collective voice of everyone who chose not to give up. A community that doesn't run from pain, that walks through it, with courage, with judgment, with honor. But listening isn't enough. You know it, you feel it. There's a difference between the one who consumes wisdom and the one who turns it into armor. That's why we created the Stoic Code. 2 principles forged over millennia by the most powerful minds in history. It's not just another book. It's a manual of psychological warfare against your own weaknesses. Each principle includes the deep teaching, its modern application, and an exercise you can implement today, not tomorrow, today. If you decide to get it, you're not just taking something for your growth. You become part of this mission. You help us bring Stoicism to thousands of people who are right now where you once were, who struggle, who fall, who need a word to remind them who they are. Your support keeps this podcast alive. It drives it. It expands it. Thanks to you, this doesn't stop. The link is in the description of this episode. Everything you need is right there. We'll see you in the next episode of Stoicism for Winners. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, without fail. Stoic sessions designed to be with you when life gets heavy, when staying calm is hard, when you need someone to remind you who you are before you forget it yourself. Follow us. The Stoic who doesn't train in calm won't find calm when the storm arrives. Until the next episode, we walk this path together, and every day there are more of us who choose not to give up. Remember this: you are the sole owner of your perception, the architect of your peace, the only one responsible for the war you choose to fight or the one you choose to end. That is Stoicism, not a philosophy, a way of being unbreakable. This is Stoicism for Winners.